I did want to comment on the fact that, you still have the title father, you still wear the collar and things like that. Do you think there's an importance to that, to having kind of an established title? And is there like a kind of gravity that comes with that wouldn't be present perhaps if you were just pastor or just Ron?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot because where I am in Texas, I'm in a very high church diocese. But we also have a lot of people who come into the Anglican tradition from the Baptist church or non-denominational churches or whatever. And so they'll just call us by our first name. Yeah. And I've never been the kind of person to correct on that particular, some of my colleagues do. It's just never. I like the term father, not so much because it reflects authority, but because it reflects the nature of what pastoral ministry should be. Pastoral ministry in the modern world, I think, has become much more enamored with management, organizational leadership, staff management, things
Growth.
like that. Right. Yeah, precisely. And I think of that verse, and as a good Anglican, I can't quote it directly. I like to say that I'm more of a Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews quoter of Scripture, because there's a place in Hebrews where the writer says, as it says somewhere, sit at my right hand.
I remember hearing there was like an academic paper that someone wrote back in the 1800s where they wrote a whole bunch of stuff, and then in the footnotes, source, this was revealed to me in a dream. And it kind of reminds me of that.
But I think, I think things like the clerical collar and the title, they can not only be beneficial for the people under our care, but honestly, I believe that they're beneficial to us who hold this office, because I remember a story of one priest who got confronted by one of his parishioners for wearing his collar everywhere, social gatherings, and he said, "Oh, well, do you wear that to remind us all that you're a priest?" And he said, "No, sir, I wear it to remind myself that I'm a priest."
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
And that there comes a point where you sometimes you have to step away from just being one of the guys and do your do your role.
Yeah, I've got a bumper sticker on my car that says the name of my church, so I feel extra convicted whenever I'm speeding or driving like a lunatic.
Yes, exactly.
To a lesser extent, I kind of understand. And I think, it's interesting as well. I don't know if you're familiar with the Reverend Calvin Robinson, the British
yes,
Anglican, I suppose, priest or minister or whatever he would go by. But he mentioned something on a podcast one time. He said that he gets a lot of comments from people who pointed out to him and kind of say that even seeing the collar is just like a symbol to them, that they feel like a closeness or a presence of God whenever that comes near them. And do you find people ever just point it out or make comments to you or touch on that?
Yes. Yeah, that's happened on both sides of the reaction.
Yeah.
Some people are just not happy, but I think others will make. I mean, even when I've gone to things like sporting events, wearing this, and somebody makes a joke like, "Oh, well, hopefully we've got the big man on our side now,"
right? Yeah,
something
bless
to
the
that
team.
Yes. But
what is the history of the collar? Because I tried to look up where that came from, and I don't know if it just came as like a practicality of clothing or whether there's a symbolic significance, but I couldn't really find where that originated from. Do you have any idea?
Well, so my understanding of it has sort of come down through oral tradition and some written sources. So I don't know if this is entirely correct, but
I'll take your word for it. It's better than my guess.
I'll just give the caveat in case, somebody watches this and says, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll be the first to agree with them. I think that, the original dress of the clergy, once the clergy became more of a set apart group, was what we call the cassock. And the cassock, it has different styles depending on which part of the world you're in, whether you're more in the Eastern Orthodox tradition or in the Western tradition. England even had its own form of the cassock, but it's basically just a long black robe. Very plain, very, and it was intended, number one, to be able to identify, okay, there's Father so-and-so because that's the one wearing a dress, walking down.
Sure.
So in England, anyway, the Church of England was not always very tolerant of the presence of the Roman Catholic Church, the continuing Roman Catholic Church in England. And so there was a time period where the Roman clergy in England were forbidden to wear the cassock. Only the state church priests were allowed to wear the cassock. And so the Romans had to come up with something to differentiate themselves when they would go out onto the street, because the cassock it wasn't a vestment for the liturgy. It was their normal street dress. So now gentlemen of the time, unlike the collared shirts that we have now, they would wear shirts with detachable collars. And of course, there would be a place, opened up here where you could put a tie, but it was a detachable collar. And the folklore goes that these clergy turned that collar around so that it was just a solid white collar around their neck, with the open part in the back, signifying that they had turned their back on the world, right? The regular tie meant
right.
And so the irony of that was that that original clerical collar, like I'm wearing what's called a tab collar, and this is basically just like a little tongue depressor that fits inside this collar. But the original clerical collar was a full white collar that would go around the neck, and in England it affectionately became known as the dog collar because it ran around the neck. But it was the Romans in England who originally wore the dog collar because they could not wear the cassock when they would be out on the street.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the dog collar eventually became the more popular form, and now most Roman Catholic priests you see wear a collar like this.
Sure, yeah. And there's, it's, I've always wondered, is there a difference, or is there, specifications for collars and those kind of things? I'm sure that's written somewhere.
If it is, I've never seen it. It just depends on the preference of the, of the person.